Two police officers stepped out of the cruiser, a male officer who looked to be in his late 30s and a female officer who appeared younger, maybe mid-20s. They surveyed the scene with practiced eyes, taking in the crowd, the motorcycles, and the obvious tension in the air. The male officer's name tag read Officer Martinez, and the female officers read Officer Chen. "We got a call about a disturbance," Officer Martinez said, approaching the manager. "What's going on here?" Rachel Hutchins quickly explained the situation, pointing out Margaret, Derek, and Keanu. As she spoke, Officer Chen walked over to Margaret to check on her condition and get her statement. The crowd remained in place, many still recording, all wanting to see how this would end. Before the officers could approach Derek, Keanu stepped forward again. There was something he needed to say first. Something important. He walked back to where Derek sat on his motorcycle, and everyone fell silent, wondering what would happen next. "I think you should apologize," Keanu said firmly, but not unkindly. "To her. Not to me, not to the crowd, not to anyone else, to the woman you targeted, the woman you scared. To Margaret." Derek's first instinct was to refuse. Part of him still wanted to cling to his pride, to his tough guy image. But as he looked around at all the faces watching him, at the police officers taking statements, at the videos still recording, he realized something important. That image was already destroyed. Everyone who saw those videos would know what kind of person he'd been in this moment. The only question now was whether he'd stay that person or choose to be someone different. Keanu's voice softened slightly. "Look, I don't know you. I don't know your story or what makes you act this way. But I do know that right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can double down on being cruel, or you can show that you're capable of being better. It won't erase what you did, but it's a start." For a long moment, Derek just sat there on his idling motorcycle. The engine rumbled beneath him, vibrating through his body. It would be so easy to just gun the throttle and ride away from all of this. But Keanu's words kept echoing in his head. "You have a choice." Slowly, Derek turned off his motorcycle. The sudden silence was almost deafening after all the noise. He removed his helmet, setting it on the handlebars, and ran his hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Then he put down the kickstand and dismounted, his legs feeling strangely unsteady. He walked toward where Margaret stood, and the crowd parted to let him through. Some people looked skeptical, like they didn't believe he was capable of genuine remorse. Others watched with cautious hope. Officer Martinez positioned himself nearby, ready to intervene if Derek tried anything. Derek stopped about 5 feet from Margaret, and for the first time he really looked at her up close. She was so small, so fragile looking. Her eyes were still red from crying, and there was a wariness in her expression that hadn't been there before he'd terrorized her. He'd put that fear there. He'd taken away her sense of safety in a simple parking lot where she was just trying to do her shopping. "Ma'am," he began, and his voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Ma'am, I want to say I'm sorry, really sorry. What I did was wrong. It was cruel and stupid, and you didn't deserve any of it." Margaret studied his face, trying to determine if he was being sincere or just putting on a show for the police and cameras. Derek seemed to sense her doubt. "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything," he continued. "I know it doesn't take back the fear I caused you or give you back the time I wasted or replace the groceries I destroyed. But I need you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. I was treating you like you weren't a real person, like you were just there for my entertainment. But you are a real person. You're someone's grandmother, someone's mother. You matter." His voice was getting thicker with emotion now, and to his own surprise, Derek felt tears stinging his eyes. "When I look at you, I see my own grandmother. She passed away 2 years ago, and I miss her every day. If someone had treated her the way I treated you today, I would have wanted to hurt them. And here I am, being exactly that person to someone else's grandmother. That makes me sick." Margaret's expression softened slightly. She could hear the genuine remorse in his voice now, could see it in his face. This wasn't a performance. This was a young man confronting his own ugliness and not liking what he saw. "I'm 78 years old," Margaret said quietly. her voice steady despite everything she'd been through. "I've been alive long enough to know that people make mistakes. Everyone does. The question is whether we learn from them or keep repeating them." Derek nodded, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'll learn from this, I promise you that. I never want to make anyone feel the way I made you feel today." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She reached out and gently patted Derek's arm. "Then I forgive you, young man. We all carry enough burdens in life without adding the weight of unforgiven mistakes. Learn from this. Be better. That's all any of us can do." The crowd was quiet. Many people visibly moved by the exchange. Some had tears in their eyes. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation they'd been expecting. It was something more powerful and more human. It was redemption, or at least the possibility of it. Officer Martinez stepped forward. "That's very gracious of you, ma'am, but I still need to take statements and file a report. Mr. He looked at Derek, waiting for a name. "Thompson. Derek Thompson." Derek supplied, his voice subdued. "Mr. Thompson, you need to understand that even though this lady has forgiven you, there may still be legal consequences for your actions. Harassment, destruction of property, creating a public disturbance. These are serious matters." Derek nodded. "I understand, officer. I'll cooperate fully. I'll take whatever consequences come. I deserve them." While Officer Martinez took Derek's information, Keanu helped Margaret finish loading her remaining groceries. Rachel, the manager, had gone inside and returned with a generous store gift card, replacement groceries for what had been destroyed, and a sincere apology on behalf of the supermarket. "We're also going to review our security protocols," Rachel told Margaret. "Our guard should have intervened much sooner. This should never have happened on our property, and I'm truly sorry you had to go through it." Margaret accepted the gifts graciously, though she insisted it wasn't necessary. Several people from the crowd also approached her, apologizing for not helping sooner and expressing their support. The young woman who'd brought the bag for the oranges even slipped Margaret her phone number, saying to call if she ever needed help with anything. As the police finished taking statements and the crowd began to disperse, Keanu stayed with Margaret until her groceries were completely loaded. "Would you like me to follow you home?" he offered. "Just to make sure you get there safely?" Margaret smiled, a real smile this time. "That's very kind of you, but I think I'll be all right now. Though I wouldn't mind if you walked with me to my car door." As they walked the few steps to her driver's door, Margaret looked up at Keanu with gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you. Not just for helping me, but for giving that young man a chance to be better. You could have just let the police handle it, but you tried to reach him as a human being. That was a gift to both of us." Keanu shrugged modestly. "I just did what felt right. We all should look out for each other, especially those of us who need it most." "My grandson loves your movies," Margaret said with a smile. "He's always telling me you seem like a genuinely good person in interviews. I can tell him now that he was absolutely right." They exchanged a brief hug, and Keanu made sure Margaret was safely in her car before stepping back. As she drove away, giving him a wave through her window, Keanu felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that he'd been able to help, sadness that help had been necessary in the first place, and hope that maybe Derek really would learn from this experience. Derek was still talking with the officers, providing his information and signing documents. Officer Martinez explained that he'd be receiving a citation for disturbing the peace and possibly facing civil charges if Margaret decided to pursue them. His motorcycle registration would be flagged, and if there were any future incidents, this report would be on record. Derek accepted it all without complaint. As Keanu walked back to his SUV, several people stopped him to thank him for intervening. A few asked for autographs or selfies, which he politely declined, saying it didn't feel appropriate given the circumstances. What mattered wasn't his fame, but what they'd all witnessed about human behavior, both its worst and its best aspects. The incident, as Keanu had predicted, did go viral. Multiple videos were posted across social media platforms, racking up millions of views. The comment sections were filled with praise for Keanu's intervention, condemnation of Derek's behavior, and discussions about bystander apathy and the importance of standing up for others. Derek Thompson's life changed dramatically after that day. His employer, a construction company that prided itself on community values, saw the videos and terminated his employment. His social media accounts were flooded with criticism, forcing him to delete them entirely. Friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone who'd become known as the guy who bullied the grandma. But something else changed too. Derek enrolled in anger management classes and started volunteering at a senior center, helping elderly people with tasks they found difficult. It was his idea, his way of trying to make amends not just to Margaret but to all elderly people. He couldn't undo what he'd done, but he could try to be better going forward. He never became famous for his redemption the way he'd become infamous for his cruelty. The videos of him bullying Margaret had millions of views, while his volunteer work went largely unnoticed. But he kept doing it anyway, not for recognition but because it felt like the right thing to do. Sometimes he thought about that day in the parking lot, about Keanu's words, about Margaret's forgiveness. Those memories motivated him to keep trying to be better. Margaret, for her part, kept a news article about the incident on her refrigerator. Not because it was about a celebrity or because she enjoyed remembering the fear she'd felt, but because it reminded her that kindness still existed in the world, that there were still people willing to stand up for others, even when it would be easier to look away. She also started speaking at community events about elder safety and the importance of intervening when witnessing harassment. She turned her traumatic experience into an opportunity to educate others and advocate for change. Her children worried it might be too much for her, reliving that fear, but Margaret insisted. If her story could prevent even one other person from feeling the way she'd felt that day, it was worth it. The supermarket implemented new training for all staff on recognizing and responding to harassment on their property. Security protocols were updated, and guards were given clear guidelines on when and how to intervene. Rachel, the manager, became an advocate for customer safety across the entire chain, using Margaret's experience as a case study in their training materials. As for Keanu, he continued living his life much as he had before, with humility and kindness. When asked about the incident in interviews, he downplayed his role, saying anyone should have done the same. He never sought recognition for his actions, believing that helping others shouldn't be about getting credit but simply about doing what's right. Years later, long after the viral videos had faded from public consciousness, Margaret would sometimes tell the story to her grandchildren. She'd explain how scared she'd felt, but also how one person choosing to help had changed everything. She'd teach them that it's not enough to be a good person in private. Sometimes being good means being brave enough to stand up publicly, even when it's uncomfortable or risky. And somewhere in the city, Derek would think about that lesson too, remembering the day he learned the difference between being tough and being strong, between causing fear and earning respect, between taking the easy path and choosing to be better. It was the worst day of his life in many ways, but also the day that set him on a better path. The parking lot where it all happened continued to see thousands of customers every week, most of them never knowing the significant events that had unfolded there. But for those who were present that day, for those who witnessed both the cruelty and the compassion, the lesson remained. We all have choices in how we treat each other. We can be like Derek was, finding entertainment in others' vulnerability. We can be like the bystanders who looked away, choosing comfort over courage, or we can be like Keanu and Margaret, choosing kindness, standing up for others, and believing in the possibility of redemption. In the end, that parking lot became more than just a place to park cars and buy groceries. It became a reminder that everyday places can be the settings for important lessons about humanity, about who we choose to be when we think no one important is watching. Because the truth is, someone is always watching. Even if it's just ourselves and the choices we make in those moments define who we really are. Before Derek could formulate a response, a manager came hurrying out of the supermarket. She was a woman in her mid-30s wearing a white shirt and black pants with a name tag that identified her as Rachel Hutchins, store manager. She looked flustered and worried, the kind of expression managers get when they realize something bad is happening on their watch. "Wilson, what's happening out here?" she asked the security guard. Then her eyes swept across the scene. She took in Margaret's tear-stained face, the scattered groceries, Derek on his motorcycle, Keanu helping to gather oranges, and the crowd of onlookers with their phones out. Her expression shifted from concern to angry in about 2 seconds. "Ma'am," Wilson, the security guard, began, clearly uncomfortable. "There's been an incident. This gentleman on the motorcycle was apparently harassing this elderly customer while she was loading her groceries." "Apparently," an older woman from the crowd called out. "There's no apparently about it. We all saw him."
"He was terrible to her."
Other voices chimed in agreement, creating a chorus of condemnation. The crowd had grown to about 20 people now, and more were drifting over to see what the commotion was about. In today's world, where everyone has a camera in their pocket, scenes like this attract attention fast. Rachel, the manager, walked over to Margaret, her demeanor completely changing to one of concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? Were you hurt?" Margaret shook her head. "No, I wasn't hurt physically. Just frightened. I was loading my groceries, and this young man on the motorcycle started yelling at me, circling my car, crushing my fruit. I didn't know what to do." Rachel's jaw tightened. She turned to look at Derek with an expression that could freeze water. "Is this true?" Derek shifted on his motorcycle seat, suddenly finding it very difficult to maintain eye contact with anyone. The crowd, the cameras, the manager, the security guard, and Keanu all waiting for his answer. He felt trapped, cornered by his own actions. "I was just messing around," he said weakly. "It wasn't that serious." "Not that serious?" Rachel's voice rose. "You terrorized one of my customers in my parking lot? You destroyed her property? You made her afraid to shop here? That sounds pretty serious to me." Keanu had finished collecting the oranges and placed them in the new bag the young woman had provided. He carried it over to Margaret's station wagon and set it gently in the back with her other groceries. Then he returned to stand near Margaret, a quiet but solid presence of support. "If you don't mind," Keanu said to Rachel, "I recorded the incident on my phone. I'd be happy to share it with you and with the police if necessary." Rachel nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Yes, I'd like to see that." She turned back to Derek. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this property immediately. You're no longer welcome here." "You can't ban me from a parking lot," Derek protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can," Rachel replied firmly. "This is private property, and as the manager, I have the authority to refuse service and access to anyone who creates a disturbance or threatens the safety of our customers." "You did both. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The crowd murmured in approval. Several people clapped. Derek looked around at all the hostile faces and realized he was completely alone in this. His friends had abandoned him. Everyone was against him, and he had no good options left. But Keanu surprisingly wasn't done. He walked over to where Derek sat on his motorcycle and spoke in a voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You can leave if you want. You can ride off and pretend this never happened. But those videos are still going to exist. They're probably already being uploaded to social media right now." Derek's eyes widened as he realized the truth of that statement. He looked at the crowd and saw at least a dozen phones pointed at him. Some people were clearly live streaming. Others were probably already posting clips to various platforms. His face, his actions, his cruelty, it was all being broadcast to the world. "What do you want from me?" Derek asked, and for the first time there was genuine fear in his voice. Not fear of physical harm, but fear of consequences. Fear of exposure. Fear of everyone knowing what kind of person he really was. "I want you to understand what you did," Keanu said quietly. "I want you to look at that woman over there and really see her. Not as a target or a joke, but as a human being. Someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone who has lived a whole life full of experiences and challenges. Someone who deserves basic respect and dignity." Derek reluctantly looked at Margaret. She was standing by her car, being comforted by several women from the crowd. One had brought her a bottle of water from inside the store. Another was helping her check over her groceries to see what could be salvaged. The store manager was talking to her in soothing tones, probably apologizing on behalf of the establishment. For the first time, Derek really looked at her and saw past his own entertainment. He saw an elderly woman who'd been genuinely frightened by his actions. He saw the trembling in her hands that hadn't completely stopped. He saw the way she kept glancing nervously in his direction, like she was afraid he might come after her again. And he saw something else too, something that made his stomach twist with an uncomfortable emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Real, genuine shame. Not embarrassment at getting caught, but actual remorse for causing another person pain. "I didn't mean to scare her that bad," he mumbled, though everyone could hear him. "But you did," Keanu replied. "Intent doesn't erase impact. You made choices, and those choices had consequences for someone else. That's what you need to understand." A man in the crowd stepped forward. He was probably in his 50s, wearing work clothes covered in paint stains. "You know what gets me about guys like you?" he said to Derek. "You act all tough picking on people who can't defend themselves. But that doesn't make you strong. It makes you a bully. A coward." "Yeah," another voice added. "My grandmother is about her age. If someone did that to her, I'd be furious. You should be ashamed." More people voiced their opinions, and Derek had to sit there and take it. Every word felt like a punch, not to his body, but to whatever was left of his pride. He'd wanted attention, wanted to feel powerful and in control. Well, he had attention now, but it wasn't the kind he'd wanted, and he'd never felt less powerful in his life. Rachel, the manager, had pulled out her own phone and was speaking to someone. When she hung up, she addressed the crowd. "I've called the police to file a report. They'll want statements from anyone who witnessed what happened." She looked directly at Derek. "They'll also want to speak with you." That snapped Derek out of his daze. "The police? Come on, that's going way too far. Nobody got hurt." "Someone could have gotten hurt." Wilson, the security guard, spoke up, apparently finding his courage now that the manager was there. "You were operating a vehicle in a reckless manner in a crowded parking lot. You destroyed property. You created a public disturbance. Those are all things the police need to know about." Derek felt panic rising in his chest. A police record? For messing with some old lady in a parking lot? This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He'd thought it would be funny, that nothing bad would come from it. He'd thought he was untouchable. Keanu saw the panic in Derek's face and surprisingly felt a small amount of pity. Not enough to excuse what Derek had done, but enough to recognize that this was a young man who'd made terrible choices and was now facing consequences he clearly hadn't anticipated. In a strange way, maybe this would be the wake-up call Derek needed. "You still have a choice here," Keanu said to Derek. "You can cooperate, take responsibility for what you did, and maybe learn something from this, or you can keep denying and deflecting, and things will only get worse." The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone look toward the parking lot entrance. The police were coming, called by the store manager. This was really happening. Derek's mind raced through his options, none of them good. He could try to run, but his license plate had been recorded. He could try to lie, but there were videos from multiple angles. He could try to minimize what he'd done, but everyone there would contradict him. As the police car pulled into the parking lot, its lights flashing but no siren, Derek realized he was out of time. Whatever happened next was going to happen whether he was ready for it or not. Derek tried to maintain his tough exterior, but cracks were starting to show. His hands gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle tighter, his knuckles going white. "I wasn't doing anything illegal," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "We were just messing around. The old lady's fine. Does she look fine to you?" Keanu gestured toward Margaret without taking his eyes off Derek. "She's crying. She's shaking. Her groceries are destroyed. You intentionally crushed her fruit with your motorcycle. You blocked her from accessing her own vehicle. You created a hostile and intimidating environment. That's textbook harassment." Margaret was standing a bit straighter now, feeling safer with someone finally standing up for her. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. She'd stopped crying, replaced by a mixture of relief and lingering fear. What would Derek do now that he'd been confronted? Would he get violent? Would he hurt this kind stranger who'd come to help her? "Look, man," Derek started, trying a different approach. His voice took on a fake friendliness that fooled nobody. "I think maybe there's been a misunderstanding here. We were just playing around, you know? Having a little fun. Nobody got hurt. Playing around." Keanu's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. "Is that what you call intimidating someone who could be your grandmother? Someone who was just trying to do her shopping in peace?" Derek's jaw worked as he tried to come up with a response. The problem was there was no good response. He'd been caught red-handed being cruel for no reason other than his own entertainment, and now he had to deal with the consequences, something he clearly wasn't used to. By this point, other people in the parking lot had started to notice the commotion. A small crowd was forming at what they probably thought was a safe distance. Some of them had their phones out, and Derek could see the little red recording lights. His situation was getting worse by the second. What had started as him picking on someone he thought was weak and defenseless was turning into a very public humiliation. You know what I think? Keanu continued, taking another step closer to Derek. I think you're the kind of person who picks on people you think can't fight back. You see someone vulnerable, and instead of helping them, you make their day worse. That says a lot more about you than it does about her. Those words hit Derek harder than he wanted to admit. Somewhere deep down, buried under years of attitude and false bravado, there was a part of him that knew Keanu was right. But admitting that would mean admitting he was wrong, that he'd done something truly shameful and his ego couldn't handle that yet. Whatever, man, Derek muttered, looking away. I don't need a lecture from some celebrity who thinks he's better than everyone else. I never said I was better than anyone, Keanu replied quietly. But right now, in this moment, I'm choosing to do the right thing. That's all any of us can do. Choose to be kind or choose to be cruel. You chose cruelty. I'm giving you a chance to make a different choice. Margaret spoke up then, her voice stronger than it had been. I just want to finish loading my groceries and go home. That's all I wanted from the beginning. I'm not trying to bother anybody. I'm just trying to live my life. The simple honesty of her statement seemed to affect some of the onlookers. A few people in the growing crowd nodded in agreement. An older woman called out, "Leave her alone. She hasn't done anything to you." Derek looked around at all the faces watching him, judging him. He saw the phones recording, capturing every moment of this encounter. He thought about those videos ending up online, going viral, people seeing his face and knowing what kind of person he was. His employer might see it. His family might see it. Everyone would know. Derek, seriously, we need to go, Tommy said more urgently now. This is bad, man. This is really bad. For a moment, it looked like Derek might actually listen to his friend. His body language shifted like he was preparing to start his bike and leave. But then his pride kicked in one more time. That stubborn refusal to back down that had gotten him into so much trouble over the years. I'm not going anywhere until I'm ready, he said loudly, making sure the crowd could hear. This is still a free country last time I checked. I can be in this parking lot if I want to, Keanu sighed, the kind of tired sigh that comes from dealing with someone who just won't see reason. He looked at his phone again, scrolling through something. You're right, it is a free country, but this parking lot belongs to the supermarket, which makes it private property, and I'm pretty sure that security camera up there, he pointed to the corner of the building where a camera was clearly visible, has been recording everything too. Derek's eyes followed where Keanu was pointing. Sure enough, there was a security camera with a clear view of where they were standing. His stomach dropped. He hadn't noticed that before. He'd been so focused on having fun at Margaret's expense that he hadn't thought about cameras or consequences or anything beyond the moment. And speaking of security, Keanu continued, I noticed there's a guard standing right over there by the entrance. He's been on his phone this whole time, but I'm pretty sure he can see what's going on here. Would you like me to call him over? Or maybe we should just call the actual police and let them sort this out. The security guard Keanu mentioned was indeed still standing near the entrance, though he'd finally put his phone away and was watching the scene with an expression that suggested he knew he should have intervened earlier and was now trying to figure out if he still needed to. Derek's friends had clearly heard enough. Tommy started his motorcycle, the engine rumbling to life. I'm out, man. This isn't worth it. The other friend followed suit, both of them looking at Derek like he was crazy for not leaving with them. You guys are just going to bail on me? Derek asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Yeah, we are, Tommy replied bluntly. Because you're acting like an idiot, and we're not going down with you. We told you to stop 10 minutes ago. This is on you now. With that, both friends slowly drove off, leaving Derek alone to face the consequences of his actions. Now it was just Derek on his motorcycle, facing Keanu, Margaret, and a growing crowd of witnesses. The balance of power had completely shifted. Derek was no longer the intimidating tough guy with his backup crew. He was just one person who'd made some very poor choices and was running out of options. Keanu knelt down and started picking up Margaret's oranges. He moved with deliberate care, gathering each piece of fruit and examining it to see if it was still good. Some were bruised from rolling across the pavement, but most were salvageable. As he worked, several people from the crowd came forward to help. A younger woman rushed over with a fresh bag from inside the store. Here, use this for the oranges, she said to Keanu, then turned to Margaret. I'm so sorry nobody helped you sooner. That was wrong of us. An elderly man with a cane walked slowly over, his face red with anger directed at Derek. You should be ashamed of yourself, young man. In my day, we were taught to respect our elders, not torment them. More voices joined in, the crowd no longer content to just watch silently. They were expressing their disapproval, their anger at what they'd witnessed. Some admitted they'd seen what was happening earlier and regretted not stepping in. Others simply wanted Derek to know that his behavior was unacceptable. Derek sat on his motorcycle, surrounded by condemnation, and for the first time started to realize the gravity of what he'd done. This wasn't just a fun story he'd tell his friends later. This was a serious situation with serious consequences. The reality of it was finally sinking in. The security guard finally decided to do his job and approached the group. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s, wearing a uniform that had seen better days. His name tag read Wilson. He looked embarrassed and annoyed in equal measure. "What's going on here?" he asked, though clearly he'd been watching long enough to have a pretty good idea. Multiple people started talking at once, explaining what had happened. The guard held up his hand to quiet them down, then looked directly at Derek. "Is this true? Were you harassing this lady?" Derek didn't answer right away. He was still trying to figure out if there was any way to talk himself out of this mess, but that flicker of hope faded almost as quickly as it came. Margaret had already watched dozens of people walk past without helping. Why would this stranger be any different? She looked back down at her scattered oranges and continued trying to gather them, her hands still trembling from fear and frustration. Derek had moved on from just circling her car. Now he was playing a twisted game, deliberately positioning his motorcycle to block Margaret wherever she tried to go. If she moved to the left side of her car, he'd roar over there. If she tried to reach for an orange that had rolled toward the front, he'd rev his engine and inch forward, forcing her to step back. It was like watching a cat toy with a mouse, except this was a real person with real feelings, and she was terrified. "Come on, Granny, show us some speed," one of Derek's friends called out, laughing so hard he had to steady himself on his bike. "Maybe do a little dance for us." Derek grinned at the suggestion. "Yeah, entertainment time. You're holding up traffic, so the least you could do is make it worth our while." Margaret's face burned with humiliation. Tears were flowing freely now, running down her weathered cheeks. Her whole body was shaking, and not just from the arthritis. She'd lived through a lot in her 78 years. She'd survived poverty as a child, discrimination as a young Asian immigrant, the loss of loved ones, and more challenges than she could count. But somehow, standing in this parking lot being mocked by strangers felt like one of the lowest moments of her life. "Please," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." "What's that?" Derek cupped his hand around his ear in an exaggerated gesture. "Can't hear you over my bike, old-timer." "Speak up." He revved the engine again, drowning out anything she might have said. Thick exhaust fumes billowed around Margaret, making her cough violently. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes watering even more from the smoke. The smell of gasoline and burning oil filled her nostrils, making her feel sick to her stomach. A family walked by, a mother and father with 2 young children. The kids stared at the scene with wide eyes, clearly sensing something was wrong. The mother quickly pulled them along, saying something about minding their own business. The father glanced back once, his expression uncomfortable, but he kept walking. Their shopping cart rattled away across the parking lot, growing fainter with distance. An older man, probably in his 60s, paused near his truck about 20 feet away. He watched for a moment and Margaret caught his eye. She saw something there, maybe sympathy, maybe even the intention to help. But then he looked at Derek and his 2 friends on their motorcycles, all of them young and strong and clearly looking for trouble. The man hesitated, then climbed into his truck and drove away. Margaret felt her hope crumble completely. She was alone in this. Nobody was going to help her. That's just how the world worked now, apparently. Everyone was too busy, too scared, or too indifferent to get involved. She bent down once more, her knees screaming in pain, and tried to reach for the oranges that were still scattered around her feet. At least if she could get those, she wouldn't have wasted all that money on fruit she couldn't even take home. Derek saw her bending down and had another cruel idea. He rode his motorcycle closer, positioning the front tire near one of the oranges. Then, with deliberate slowness, he rolled forward just enough to crush it beneath his wheel. The orange burst with a wet pop, sending juice and pulp spraying across the asphalt. "Oops," Derek said with mock innocence. "Guess that one's not good anymore." "My bad." His friends erupted in laughter, one of them actually slapping his thigh like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "Dude, you're terrible," the friend said, but he was grinning ear to ear, clearly enjoying the show. Margaret stared at the crushed orange, at the bright pulp and juice spreading across the ground. Something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, overwhelming and paralyzing, but now there was something else too. Anger. Deep, burning anger at the unfairness of it all. She was a human being. She'd worked hard her whole life, raised good children, paid her taxes, been kind to her neighbors. She didn't deserve this. Nobody deserved this, but what could she do? She was one small old woman against 3 young men on motorcycles. If she said something, if she fought back, they might hurt her. They might do something worse than just mock her. So she did what she'd learned to do over a long lifetime of facing challenges bigger than herself. She endured. She stayed quiet. She tried to make herself invisible. That's when she heard the voice. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was calm, but there was something solid about it. Something that cut through the noise of the motorcycles and the laughter. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it had weight. Authority, even. Derek turned around, ready to tell whoever it was to mind their own business. He was on a roll, having the time of his life, and he wasn't about to let some random person ruin his fun. But when he saw who was standing there, his expression changed. Just for a second, surprise flickered across his face before his pride kicked back in. The man standing about 10 feet away was Keanu Reeves. There was no mistaking him, even in his casual clothes and without the fancy styling he had in movies. He had that distinctive look, that unmistakable face that had been on screen for decades. Derek recognized him immediately, and so did his friends. One of them muttered something under his breath, and the other one's eyes went wide. But Derek wasn't about to back down, especially not in front of his buddies. He'd spent years cultivating a reputation as someone who didn't take nonsense from anyone, who didn't bow down to authority or fame or anything else. His whole identity was wrapped up in being tough, being fearless, being the guy who did what he wanted without consequences. Well, Derek said, a sneer spreading across his face. "Look who decided to show up. A movie star. You filming something here, or are you just lost?" Keanu didn't react to the sarcasm. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed but ready, his eyes moving between Derek and Margaret. He took in the scene quickly, and the scattered oranges, the crushed fruit under Derek's tire, the tears on Margaret's face, the way she was pressed against her car like she was trying to disappear. "I asked if there was a problem," Keanu repeated, his voice still calm but with an edge now that hadn't been there before. "No problem at all," Derek replied, revving his engine slightly. "Just having a conversation with Granny here about parking lot etiquette. Nothing that concerns you, Hollywood." Keanu took a step closer, and Derek's friends shifted uncomfortably on their bikes. They weren't as confident as Derek was acting. They could see this situation was getting out of hand, and having a celebrity witness to their behavior suddenly made it feel a lot more real and a lot more risky. "It looks to me like you're harassing this woman," Keanu said. He turned to Margaret, and his voice softened completely. "Ma'am, are you okay? Did these men hurt you?" Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. She was overwhelmed by everything, by the fear, the humiliation, and now this unexpected intervention. Finally, she managed to shake her head. "No, I'm not hurt. Just scared." That admission, spoken so quietly and honestly, seemed to hang in the air. Just scared. 2 simple words that contained so much pain and vulnerability. Keanu nodded, then gently took a few steps toward Margaret, positioning himself slightly between her and Derek's motorcycle. It was a subtle movement, but it changed the dynamic completely. Now Derek couldn't get to Margaret without going through Keanu first. "This doesn't concern you, man," Derek said again, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Why don't you go back to your fancy car and let us handle our business?" "Your business?" Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What business is that exactly? Terrorizing elderly women in parking lots, destroying their property, making them afraid to do their grocery shopping?" One of Derek's friends cleared his throat nervously. "Derek, maybe we should just go. I mean, this is getting kind of blown out of proportion." "Shut up, Tommy," Derek snapped without looking at his friend. His eyes were locked on Keanu and his jaw was clenched tight. He was trapped now, backed into a corner of his own making. If he left, he'd look weak in front of his friends. If he stayed, things were only going to get worse. Keanu reached into his pocket slowly, making sure Derek could see exactly what he was doing. He pulled out his phone and held it up. "I've been watching this whole thing from my car for the last few minutes. I've been recording it too. Got some pretty clear footage of everything you've been doing." Derek's face went pale, then flushed red. "You can't do that. That's like an invasion of privacy or something." "Actually, I can," Keanu replied calmly. "We're in a public place and you're engaged in what looks a lot like harassment, possibly assault. I'm pretty sure the police would be very interested in seeing this video. I've got your face, your license plate, everything." The mention of police made Derek's friends exchange worried glances. Tommy, the one who'd suggested they leave, looked like he was ready to start his bike and take off right then and there. The other friend was chewing his lip nervously, probably running through all the ways this could go wrong for them. The California sun was hanging high in the afternoon sky, casting sharp shadows across the busy supermarket parking lot in Malibu. It was one of those perfect days where the temperature was just right, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the nearby ocean. Cars filled almost every spot, and shoppers pushed their carts back and forth, focused on their errands and weekend plans. In the middle of all this everyday activity, an elderly woman stood beside her old station wagon. Her name was Margaret Chen, and at 78 years old, she'd seen a lot in her lifetime. Today, she was just trying to finish her weekly grocery shopping, something she'd been doing on her own since her husband passed away 3 years ago. She refused to let her children do it for her, insisting she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But today was proving more difficult than usual. Her arthritis was acting up again, making her fingers stiff and her movements slower than she liked. Each grocery bag felt heavier than it should, and she had to pause between lifts to catch her breath. She'd already loaded 3 bags into the back of her car, and there were 4 more sitting in her cart. She told herself to take it easy, to not rush. There was no prize for finishing fast. As she reached for the 4th bag, a sound ripped through the peaceful parking lot. It was the deep, aggressive roar of a motorcycle engine, the kind that makes your chest vibrate and your ears ring. Margaret flinched at the noise, her heart skipping a beat. The bag she'd been lifting slipped from her arthritic fingers and hit the pavement with a thud. Oranges burst from the bag and rolled in every direction across the hot asphalt. "Oh no," she whispered to herself, watching helplessly as her fruit scattered. She bent down slowly, her knees protesting with every movement, trying to gather the oranges before they rolled too far away. The motorcycle came closer, the engine revving louder and louder. Margaret looked up and saw a large man sitting on a gleaming chrome bike. He was probably in his early 30s, with muscular arms covered in tattoos and a leather vest that looked like it had seen better days. His name was Derek Thompson, though Margaret didn't know that. She didn't know anything about him except that he was making a terrible amount of noise and heading straight toward her. Derek pulled his motorcycle up close, too close for comfort, and revved the engine again. The sound was deafening. He had a smirk on his face, the kind that told you he knew exactly what he was doing and was enjoying every second of it. "Hey, move it, Grandma," he shouted over the noise of his bike. "You're taking up way too much space here." Margaret looked up at him, confusion washing over her face. She wasn't blocking anything. Her car was properly parked in a regular spot, and she was simply loading her groceries like hundreds of other people did every single day. "I'm sorry," she said, not quite understanding what he wanted. "You heard me," Derek yelled, revving his engine again for emphasis. "Some of us got places to be, and you're moving slower than a turtle. This ain't a nursing home parking lot." His words stung more than Margaret wanted to admit. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and hurt. "I'm going as fast as I can, young man," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll be done in just a moment." But Derek wasn't interested in waiting, and he certainly wasn't interested in being kind. He had apparently decided that this elderly woman was going to be his entertainment for the afternoon. He began circling her car on his motorcycle, the engine roaring each time he passed. The exhaust fumes made Margaret cough, and she pressed herself against her station wagon, trying to make herself small. Other shoppers were walking through the parking lot, pushing their carts, loading their own cars. They could see what was happening. Some glanced over, their faces showing concern for a brief moment before they looked away. Others pretended not to notice at all, suddenly very focused on their own tasks. A couple walking to their car actually sped up when they saw the situation, hurrying to get away from the confrontation. Nobody stopped to help. Margaret's heart was pounding now, and not just from the physical effort of bending down. She was frightened. This man was so much bigger than her, so much younger and stronger, and he seemed to have no problem intimidating an old woman in broad daylight. She tried to continue gathering her oranges, but her hands were shaking so badly that she kept dropping them. "Please," she said quietly, though she doubted he could hear her over the noise of his motorcycle. "Please, I just need to pick up my groceries." Derek heard her well enough. He laughed, a harsh sound that made Margaret flinch. "What's the matter, Grandma? Can't keep up with the young folks?" He deliberately rode his motorcycle closer to one of the oranges she was reaching for and kicked it with his boot, sending it rolling under a nearby car where she'd never be able to reach it. That's when two more motorcycles pulled up. Derek's friends had arrived, drawn by the sound of his bike and probably curious about what he was up to. They were younger guys, maybe mid-20s, and they took one look at the situation and started laughing along with Derek. "Dude, what are you doing?" one of them asked, grinning. "Just having a little fun," Derek replied, gesturing at Margaret like she was part of a show. "Granny here thinks she owns the whole parking lot." The friends laughed again, and Margaret felt her eyes filling with tears. This wasn't about parking spaces or moving too slowly. This was about cruelty, pure and simple. These young men had decided that her age and vulnerability made her an acceptable target for their amusement. She tried one more time to reason with them. "Young man, I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just loading my groceries into my car. Surely you can understand that." "This is our parking lot now, lady," Derek said, positioning his bike to block her path as she tried to move around her car. "Maybe you should think about shopping somewhere else. Somewhere more your speed. You know, somewhere with walkers and wheelchairs." His friends howled with laughter at that comment, high-fiving each other like they'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. Margaret felt something break inside her chest. Not physically, but emotionally. How had the world become so cruel? When had it become acceptable to treat other people, especially vulnerable ones, like this? What none of them knew was that they were being watched. 3 parking spaces away sat a dark SUV with tinted windows. The man inside had been sitting there for several minutes, enjoying a quiet moment before his next appointment. He'd stopped at the supermarket to grab a few things, nothing major, just the kind of quick errand that everyone does. He'd been scrolling through his phone when the sound of the motorcycle first caught his attention. Keanu Reeves looked up from his phone and watched the scene beginning to unfold. At first he thought maybe it was just someone being a bit loud, the kind of minor annoyance you see in parking lots sometimes. But as he watched Derek circle Margaret's car, as he saw the elderly woman press herself against her vehicle in fear, as he noticed all the other shoppers deliberately looking away, he felt anger rising in his chest. He'd been famous long enough to see a lot of things. He'd seen how people treated each other when they thought nobody important was watching. He'd seen cruelty and kindness in equal measure. But something about this particular scene struck a chord deep within him. Maybe it reminded him of his own mother, who had passed away after a long battle with illness. Maybe it was simply that he couldn't stand to see someone being bullied.